The cold December wind cut through downtown Detroit like a blade, carrying with it the familiar scent of car exhaust and distant factory smoke. Marshall Mathers pulled his black hoodie tighter around his face as he stepped out of his Range Rover, the weight of another sleepless night heavy on his shoulders. The recording studio had been his refuge for the past 18 hours, but even music couldn't quiet the restlessness that had been eating at him lately. At 48, Eminem had conquered every mountain the music industry could throw at him. Grammy Awards lined his shelves, platinum plaques covered his walls, and his bank account had more zeros than he could have ever imagined as a struggling kid from 8 Mile. Yet tonight, walking through the streets where he'd grown up, he felt more lost than ever. He'd been driving aimlessly after leaving the studio, his mind churning over lyrics that wouldn't come together, when he spotted the small crowd gathered around the Coney Island Diner on Grand River Avenue. The place had been a landmark since he was a teenager, a beacon of greasy comfort food and late-night conversations. But tonight, something was different. As he approached, he could see people huddled together, their breath visible in the frigid air. Someone had set up a makeshift soup kitchen in the diner's parking lot, serving hot meals to Detroit's homeless population. The sight stirred something deep in Marshall's chest, a mixture of respect and sadness that he'd learned to carry from his own days of uncertainty and struggle. He hung back, watching from the shadows as volunteers ladled soup into styrofoam containers and handed out sandwiches wrapped in foil. The recipients ranged from young adults who looked like they'd aged beyond their years to elderly individuals whose stories were written in the lines of their weathered faces. That's when he saw him standing at the edge of the crowd, clutching a worn canvas bag to his chest. Was a man who made Marshall's heart stop. Even after 30 years, even beneath the unkempt beard and hollow cheeks, he recognized those eyes immediately. They were the same eyes that had looked at him with patience when everyone else had given up. The same eyes that had stayed after school to help him with his writing when other teachers had written him off as a lost cause. Mr. David Patterson, his 10th grade English teacher. Marshall's mind raced back to Lincoln High School, to those brutal years when he'd been angry at the world and everyone in it. He remembered the way other teachers would roll their eyes when he walked into their classrooms, how they'd already decided he was destined for failure before he'd even opened his mouth. But Mr. Patterson had been different. Your words have power, Marshall, he used to say, sitting across from him at that scarred wooden desk after the final bell had rung. Don't waste them on anger alone. Channel that fire into something that can light the way for others. It was Mr. Patterson who had first encouraged him to write his feelings down, who had shown him that poetry and rap weren't so different, that both could be vehicles for truth and healing. When Marshall's home life was chaos, when his mother's addictions made every day a battle, Mr. Patterson's classroom had been a sanctuary. Now, watching his former teacher accept a bowl of soup with trembling hands, Marshall felt his world tilt on its axis. He pulled out his phone, fingers shaking slightly as he dialed his assistant's number. Paul, it's me. I need you to do something, and I need it done quietly. There's a homeless outreach program happening at the Coney Island on Grand River. I need you to make a substantial donation anonymously, and I need contact information for the organizers. Marshall, it's almost midnight. Can this wait until no? It can't wait. After ending the call, Marshall stood frozen, watching as Mr. Patterson found a spot on a concrete barrier to eat his meal. The teacher's movements were careful, deliberate, as if he was trying to preserve whatever dignity he had left. Marshall recognized that particular kind of pride he'd worn it himself during his hungriest days. For 20 minutes, he remained in the shadows, wrestling with his own emotions. Part of him wanted to approach immediately, to throw his arms around the man who had believed in him when no one else would. But another part of him was terrified of what had brought Mr. Patterson to this point, terrified of not knowing the right words to say. Finally, as the crowd began to thin and volunteers started packing up, Marshall stepped forward. Mr. Patterson. The older man looked up, confusion flickering across his face before recognition dawned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mr. Patterson's face crumpled, not with shame, but with a complex mixture of joy and sorrow. Marshall Mathers, he whispered. My God, look at you, sir. Marshall's voice caught in his throat. Up close, he could see how much his teacher had changed. The man who had once commanded a classroom with his presence now seemed fragile, diminished. What happened? Mr. Patterson managed a weak smile. Life, son, life happened. They stood there in the cold, two figures separated by success and circumstance, yet connected by threads that had never truly been broken. Can I buy you a coffee? Somewhere warm? Marshall asked. Mr. Patterson glanced around, clearly aware that people were beginning to notice the famous rapper's presence. Marshall, you don't need to, please. The word came out more desperately than Marshall had intended. Please, let me. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in an all-night diner across town, steam rising from their coffee cups like small offerings to the night. Mr. Patterson had aged dramatically. Marshall calculated he had to be in his early 70s now, but his eyes still held that spark of intelligence that had made him such an effective teacher. I lost everything in 2008, Mr. Patterson began, his voice steady but weary. The financial crisis hit teachers' pensions hard, but that wasn't the worst of it. My wife Alina, she got sick. Cancer. We spent everything trying to save her. Sold the house, cashed out my retirement, maxed out every credit card we had. Marshall listened, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug, feeling each word like a physical blow. She died 3 years ago, Mr. Patterson continued. After that, I just ... I couldn't find my footing again. Depression hit me like a freight train. I lost the apartment, couldn't keep steady work. Pride kept me from reaching out to former colleagues. Too, family, you know how it is. Sometimes it's easier to disappear than to admit you're drowning. Why didn't you? Marshall started, then stopped himself. He understood pride. He understood the fear of being seen as weak. Reach out to you. Mr. Patterson smiled sadly. Marshall, you were dealing with your own struggles. I read about them, watched from a distance as you fought your own demons. How could I add my problems to yours? Because you saved my life, Marshall said quietly. Because when everyone else saw an angry, worthless kid, you saw potential. You saw something worth saving. Tears welled up in Mr. Patterson's eyes. You saved yourself, son. I just provided a little encouragement along the way. No, Marshall shook his head firmly. You did more than that. You gave me the tools to turn my pain into purpose. Every song I've written, every success I've had, it all traces back to that classroom. To you believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. They talked through the night, sharing stories and memories. Mr. Patterson spoke about the hundreds of students he'd taught over the years. How he'd followed Marshall's career with the pride of a father watching his son succeed. Marshall shared stories about his daughters, about how he'd tried to pass on the lessons Mr. Patterson had taught him about the power of words and the importance of never giving up. As dawn approached, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, Marshall made a decision that would change both their lives. I want to help you, he said. Not just with money, though that's part of it. I want to help you find your purpose again. Mr. Patterson looked skeptical. Marshall, I appreciate the sentiment, but hear me out. Marshall interrupted. I've been thinking about starting a foundation, something focused on education, on helping kids who are struggling the way I was. Kids who need someone to believe in them. I can't think of anyone better to help me run it than the man who taught me that words can change the world. I'm 72 years old. Marshall, I'm not the teacher I once was. You're exactly the teacher you've always been, Marshall insisted. Age doesn't diminish wisdom. If anything, it deepens it. These kids need someone who understands struggle, who's faced adversity and survived it. They need authenticity, not perfection. Over the following weeks, Marshall quietly arranged for Mr. Patterson to move into a small but comfortable apartment in a safe Detroit neighborhood. But more importantly, he involved his former teacher in every aspect of planning what would become the Patterson Mathers Foundation for Educational Empowerment. The foundation's mission was simple but powerful: to identify struggling students who showed potential but lacked support, and to provide them with mentorship, resources, and most importantly, someone who believed in them. Mr. Patterson became the foundation's first educational director, using his decades of experience to develop programs that would reach kids who had been written off by the system. The foundation's headquarters was established in a renovated building in downtown Detroit, featuring state-of-the-art computer labs, quiet study spaces, and most importantly, rooms where kids could meet one-on-one with mentors. Marshall insisted that Mr. Patterson's office be at the center of it all, a place where the next generation of dreamers could find the same encouragement that had once changed an angry teenager's life. 6 months after that cold December night, the foundation held its first graduation ceremony. 12 students who had been on the verge of dropping out had not only completed their high school education, but had been accepted to colleges and trade schools across the country. Marshall stood at the back of the ceremony, watching as Mr. Patterson addressed the graduates and their families. His former teacher had regained weight and confidence, his voice strong and clear as he spoke about the power of perseverance and the importance of believing in yourself even when others don't. Every person in this room has a story, Mr. Patterson told the audience. Some of those stories include chapters of struggle, of doubt, of moments when giving up seemed like the only option. But you're here today because you chose to write a different ending. You chose to let your struggles become your strength. After the ceremony, as families celebrated and students posed for pictures, Marshall approached his former teacher. How does it feel? He asked. Mr. Patterson smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes completely. Like coming home, he said, like remembering who I was always meant to be. You know, Marshall said, looking around at the celebration surrounding them, I used to think success was about the number of records sold or awards won. But seeing these kids graduate, knowing we played a small part in their journey, this feels bigger than anything I've ever accomplished. That's because it is bigger, Mr. Patterson replied. Individual success is satisfying, but lifting others up, that's transformative. Not just for them, but for us too. As the evening wound down, Marshall found himself reflecting on the strange turns life could take. 6 months ago, he'd been a successful but restless artist, questioning his purpose beyond entertainment. Today, he was part of something that would outlast any song he'd ever written. The foundation grew quickly, attracting support from other celebrities, local businesses, and community leaders who recognized the power of its mission. But at its heart, it remained true to the simple principle that Mr. Patterson had taught Marshall all those years ago. Everyone deserves someone who believes in them. 2 years later, Marshall stood on stage at the Grammy Awards, holding his latest trophy for Best Rap Album, but instead of giving the usual thank you speech, he did something unexpected. "This award represents a lot of things," he said, looking directly into the camera. "Success, recognition, the culmination of hard work. But I want to talk about something more important than any award I could ever win. 2 years ago, I found my high school English teacher, Mr. David Patterson, living on the streets of Detroit. The man who had taught me to channel my anger into art, who had believed in me when no one else would, had lost everything." The audience was silent, captivated by his words. Instead of just helping him get back on his feet, we decided to help others together. The Patterson Mathers Foundation has now helped over 300 at-risk students complete their education. But more than that, it's taught me that real success isn't measured in albums sold or trophies won. It's measured in lives changed, in potential unlocked, in the ripple effect of believing in someone when they can't believe in themselves. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Patterson, if you're watching, and I know you are because you never missed my performances, thank you for saving my life. And thank you for letting me help save others." The camera cut to Mr. Patterson, sitting in the foundation's main conference room with a group of current students, watching the broadcast together. Tears streamed down his face as the kids around him cheered, proud to be part of something that had just been recognized on the world's biggest stage. Later that night, Marshall called his former teacher. "Did you see it?" he asked. "I saw it," Mr. Patterson replied, his voice filled with pride. But more importantly, the kids saw it. They saw that their struggles don't define their limits, their dreams do. "You know what the craziest part is?" Marshall said. "I thought I was rescuing you that night. But really, you rescued me again. You gave me a purpose bigger than myself, a way to make sure the lessons you taught me could reach thousands of other kids who need to hear them. That's the thing about teaching," Mr. Patterson replied. "The learning never stops flowing in both directions." Today, the Patterson Mathers Foundation operates in 12 cities across the United States. It has helped over 2,000 students graduate from high school and pursue higher education or vocational training. But perhaps more importantly, it has created a network of mentors and supporters who understand that sometimes all it takes to change a life is someone willing to say, "I believe in you." Mr. Patterson, now 75, continues to serve as the foundation's educational director. His office walls are covered with graduation photos, thank you letters, and updates from former students who have gone on to become teachers, doctors, artists, and community leaders themselves. Marshall still records music, still performs, still creates art that resonates with millions of people around the world. But when asked about his greatest accomplishment, he doesn't mention album sales or chart positions. He talks about a foundation that grew from a chance encounter on a cold December night, and about a teacher who taught him that success without purpose is just noise. The story of their reunion spread far beyond Detroit, inspiring other successful individuals to look for ways to give back to the people who had helped shape them. It sparked conversations about homelessness, about the way society treats its elderly, and about the responsibility successful people have to lift up those who lifted them up. But for Marshall and Mr. Patterson, the real victory wasn't in the publicity or recognition. It was in the quiet moments when a struggling student finally understood a difficult concept, when a teenager who had given up on education decided to try again, when someone who had been written off by the world discovered they had value and potential. On the 3rd anniversary of the foundation, Marshall and Mr. Patterson stood together in the main conference room, looking at a wall covered with success stories, photos of graduates, acceptance letters to colleges, wedding invitations from former students who had found love and purpose, birth announcements from young parents who were determined to break cycles of poverty and give their children better opportunities. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't seen you that night?" Marshall asked. Mr. Patterson was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "I think the universe has a way of bringing people together when they need each other most. If it hadn't been that night, it would have been another time, another place. Some connections are too strong to stay broken forever." "You really believe that?" "I've spent my life watching young people overcome impossible odds," Mr. Patterson replied. "I've learned that hope has a way of finding us, even in our darkest moments. Sometimes it comes in the form of a teacher who believes in a struggling student. Sometimes it comes in the form of a successful student who remembers his struggling teacher. The important thing is recognizing it when it arrives and having the courage to act on it. As they stood there, surrounded by the evidence of lives changed and potential unlocked, both men understood that their story was part of something much larger. It was about the connections that bind us together, about the responsibility we have to lift each other up, and about the truth that success without service is ultimately empty. The boy who had once sat in the back of Mr. Patterson's classroom, angry at the world and convinced he had no future, had grown into a man who understood that his greatest gift wasn't his talent for music. It was his ability to recognize and nurture talent in others. And the teacher who had once believed in that boy, even when he couldn't believe in himself, had found his way back to purpose through the very student he had helped save. Their story became more than just a tale of reunion and redemption. It became a reminder that we all have the power to be someone's Mr. Patterson, to see potential where others see problems, to offer hope where others offer judgment, and to believe in someone when they can't believe in themselves. In a world that often feels divided and disconnected, theirs was a story about the enduring power of human connection, about the ripple effects of kindness, and about the truth that sometimes the teacher becomes the student, and the student becomes the teacher, and in that exchange, both are transformed. The foundation continues to grow, but its mission remains the same: to ensure that no young person with potential goes without someone who believes in them. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person saying, "I see something special in you," to change not just one life, but generations of lives that follow. And in classrooms across Detroit and beyond, new teachers are learning the lesson that Mr. Patterson taught Marshall all those years ago, that words have power, that every student has potential, and that believing in someone can literally save their life. The story that began with a chance encounter on a cold winter night had become a legacy that would outlast them both. A reminder that the most important lessons we learn aren't found in textbooks, but in the connections we make with each other, and the courage we find to lift each other up when life knocks us down.